My name is Charles Turano, and I'm a product manager at Sitecore. Lately, I've been working on a new version of Razzle and a new tool for the Sitecore developer collection called Sitecore for Visual Studio. Today, I'm going to show you how to use the Sitecore command line interface and Sitecore for Visual Studio to explore the new serialization features in the new Sitecore developer experience. The demo environment I'm using consists of two Sitecore instances, dev and prod. I've also created a simple developer project using the instructions found in the Sitecore documentation site. The developer project follows the Helix design principles. The solution is designed to highlight the serialization features of the new Sitecore developer experience. There will be no discussion of rendering hosts in this presentation. In the past, Sitecore serialization has been primarily handled by two incompatible tools, TDS and Unicorn. Your development team needed to choose between the tools at the start of the project, and switching between the tools is difficult. The tools for the new developer experience were built from the start as two facets of the same tool. Your developers can choose to use the CLI tools or Sitecore for Visual Studio interchangeably. I'm going to describe the structure of the serialization components in a typical development project. The serialization components of the new Sitecore developer experience use environments declared in the Sitecore user.json file to hold authentication information for the server.
Here we see a user.json file, and we can see we've got endpoints called default. The host and authority specify the Sitecore server and identity server. The access token is the values used by the serialization API to authenticate to those servers. The Sitecore JSON file is the root of the serialization process. This file contains an array of search paths used by the serialization API to find the modules in the project. In this case, the module files always end with star.module.json and are located in the folder structure 2 folders down from the root. You can create an absolute path for each module, but it is recommended to use the wildcard paths as shown. Modules are designed to be units of functionality where everything for that piece of functionality is grouped together under a single location in source control. A module for a Helix feature, for example, could contain code, templates, renderings, placeholders. The Sitecore items for the feature are spread throughout the Sitecore content tree, but the module tells the serialization APIs how to pull these separate pieces of the feature together, organizing them into a simple group of files in the solution. Now I'm going to show you how module files are structured. This will help you gain a better understanding of the serialization architecture. Here we can see the project dev project module. This module contains schema, which is used by tools like Visual Studio to provide IntelliSense for the developer. Description, which is simply a comment about the module. Namespace, which uniquely identifies the module and is also used to so it can be referenced by other modules. This allows the module structure to declare the order that the modules are installed into the serialization API. Next, we have items, which represent the Sitecore items that are going to be in the module. Path is the path to the items, in this case, items. Includes tell the Sitecore serialization API which folder paths to include in the module from Sitecore. So here we've named it templates. We've got a path in Sitecore. The database is master. Allowed push and item descendants, I'll talk about in a moment. Here we can see I've got layouts, I've got placeholder settings, I've got a content route, and I've got a reference to the feature news module. If I go into Visual Studio and I want to look at these things in Sitecore for Visual Studio, I would right-click on the solution and choose Sitecore Module Explorer. And here we can see I've got an environment called default. And here's a form that shows all of the properties in the default JSON file. If I double-click on Sitecore configuration route, we see this is a form that allows us to edit the Sitecore JSON. I could go and add my globs. I could specify the paths. Everything that I could do inside of the JSON file can also be done in this form. If I take a look at the dev project module, I can see I've got the same things that I looked at in the module JSON. If I double click on templates, I can see I've got the same properties that I had in each include. So here we have the scope, and what scope does is it tells the serialization API how to handle the items underneath the root of the serialization path. So our choices are item and descendants, item and children, which say just look at the children directly underneath it without descending into all of their children, single item, which says just look at that single item, and descendants only. Allowed push operations tells the serialization API how to deal with push operations and what to do with items in Sitecore that are different from items in the file system. So our choices are create, update, and delete, which says to create any items that are not there, update any changed items, and delete any items in Sitecore that are not in the folder structure. Create an update just creates and updates items, and create only just creates new items without changing anything. Create an update and create only are used to hand off content to the content editors, so developers will never change that content once it's created for the first time. So let's look at an example of how that would be done. If I go over to my development environment, I can see that I've got dev project content, I've got a home item, I've got pages 1, 2, and 3, and I've also got some test content. If I go back over to the demo content module, I can see the namespace is demo content. I reference the dev project, which is useful because now I could tell the serialization API to push the dev project and all the templates that make up the project before I actually push the content. My path is content. My allowed push operation is create only, since we're going to hand these off to the content editor. The database is master. The name is content tree. The path is dev project home. Scope is item and descendants. And we have a new item here called rules. Rules allow us to specify rules for how to handle specific folders underneath the dev project home folder. In this case, the folder called test content is ignored. And in fact, when we open up content home, we could see we just have pages 1, 2, and 3 underneath the folder for home. If I go back over to the Sitecore Module Explorer, I could see that I've got each of these serialized items here. I've got a rules folder here, which shows me all of my rules. If I want to add a new rule, I would say /test, and we'll say ignored. Once I save this, I could go back over to Visual Studio Code and see that the rule was immediately added to the module JSON. If I remove it and save it, we could see that that rule has been removed. So what this shows is that Sitecore for Visual Studio uses all of the exact same configuration files, folders, and local files in the file system as the Sitecore CLI for manipulating Sitecore items. Next, we want to create a new module, and that is going to be called a featured news feature. Next, we want to create a new module, we're going to add a news feature and pull existing Sitecore items into the project. We could add modules by creating the file directly or adding a module in Sitecore for Visual Studio. In this case, we're going to create the module in VS Code. So to do this, first thing I want to do is grab the top piece of an existing module to make things quicker and easier. And I'm going to go to Feature, News. Say new file and call it feature.news.module.json. Now we'll paste the header in here, and let's change the namespace to feature.news. I want to specify the name is templates. Path is the Sitecore path to our news templates, which is right here. Database is master. Allowed push operations is create, update, and delete. Scope is item and descendants. So let's close up all of the various objects. And save our JSON file. Now, when I go back over to Visual Studio, refresh Sitecore Module Explorer, I could see I've got a feature news with the templates I just created. Here I could choose Add Include, and I'm going to create renderings. And the Sitecore path to the renderings is right here. Master, scope is item in descendants, create, update, and delete. We're good to go. Now, when I save this, we go back to Visual Studio Code and immediately see our new include is in the module file. Next, we'll pull the Sitecore items for the feature into the project. In this case, I'm going to use PowerShell window and VS Code. To do this, I'm going to execute a Sitecore Seer pull. And I'm going to do it with a -W, which says do a what if, which tells us what it's going to do without actually doing it. So here we could see there were a bunch of items that were added, and they would be added had I not done a -W. If I go back over to Visual Studio, I can right-click on the window and choose Pull Items from Sitecore, and you can see I get the exact same information, but it's in a window that allows me to pick and choose the items that I want to sync. So I've just pulled some of those items in. If I go back over to Visual Studio Code, I could pull the rest in. And this simply shows that these two tools operate hand in hand and are completely compatible with each other and know exactly what they're doing. So the next thing to do is we want to create a package and push those items to the production server. So there are two ways to do this. The first is using the CLI, and the second is using a build project in Sitecore for Visual Studio. We're going to start with the CLI. So here I'm going to do a Sitecore Seer package create. So what this did was it created a package. And when we take a look at production, we could see that the content is empty, feature and project don't have any items underneath them. So we've got a fresh install of Sitecore ready to accept our new Sitecore items. So now I'm going to push those items, Sitecore, using a Sitecore Seer package install. In this case, I specify the CM server is the prod server. The authority for that is the prod identity server. The client secret is Symposium, and the client ID is the Sitecore CLI server. The path to the package is project.item_package. So here it's pushed all those items into production, and we could take a quick look at production to see what it looks like. Refresh this folder. We can see I've got dev project, I've got home. I have page 1, 2, and 3 without my test items. If I refresh my templates, you can see I've got feature, I've got news, and I've got a news template, which is what I just created. When I look at the news template, I find that I accidentally forgot to set the types for the various fields. So let's go back and update the news template in development, rebuild the package, and redeploy it. So I will go and update the short description to multi-line, rich text, image, and date is date time. I will save it. If I go back to the CLI, I could do a -W. We could see 4 things have been changed. If I want a little more information, I could do a -W-V, which is verbose. And I could see that revision, updated, and single line text were updated on each of these items. If I go back to Visual Studio and hit refresh, I could see that the items that were updated were the same. And if I expand an updated item, I could see the revision, updated, and single line text fields were changed. Now, if I choose 2 of these and choose sync, I can go back over to Visual Studio, Visual Studio Code, and again, do a pull operation and get the other 2. So the next thing is we want to build our package. So we're going to say ser package create, path to the package, and overwrite. So here I've created the new package, and we're going to redeploy the package to production. So there the package has been deployed. If I go back over to production, I can click on news, refresh the news item, and we can see that our short description, content, image, and date time have been set properly. So the last thing to talk about is building a package as part of your build process as opposed to doing it using CLI commands. If I right click on, this was added. This was done using a dev project which is part of the Sitecore for Visual Studio. The way this was added was I right click, add, new project, and search for Sitecore for Visual Studio project. And I follow the wizard, and this is created. To set up the package build during build of a specific configuration, you would go into the project and choose to update the serialized item package. You right check build serialized package. You can see that I've got the configuration, and I can choose which configuration I want to do this for. I've chosen to include all modules, but if I want, I could cherry pick which modules to include or exclude. I could also change the name and path of the package. If I'm interested in setting up a CI build, I could tell it to automatically push serialized items during the build. So that would be done using a checkbox. I would specify the environment I'm pushing to, and I could choose to push all modules or just cherry pick which modules to include or exclude. Now, when I build the solution, I take a look at the output. I could see essentially the same output that I got when I ran the tool from the command line to build this package.
As you can see, the new Sitecore developer experience offers some incredibly powerful presentation. Thank you.
Well, that was great, Charlie. Thank you.
Thank you.
Now, this is the first live Q&A we're doing at a virtual symposium. We're breaking history right here, Charlie. I don't think you realize this. First live Q&A at a symposium ever virtually. So we're going to do this all kinds of wrong right now, all right?
I plan on it.
We need to make this a big moment. Now, for everybody who's watching along, welcome. Hi.
Hello.
My name's Jason.
I'm Charlie Turano.
Charlie. We are going to take questions from you right now. I don't know what questions you have for Charlie. I had a few that I wanted to get the ice kind of broken with because, Charlie and I get a chance to work together at Sitecore, but we don't always get to talk serialization all the time. So there were a few things I wanted to get cleared up. And if you can, drop your questions in there and we'll take a look and we'll get over to them as we have the time, and hopefully we can get to all your questions. Now, the first one up. Now, for anybody who's done a lot of Sitecore development over the years, they're familiar with team development for Sitecore, TDS. I know I used to use it a lot when I was on the partner side. Is this new Sitecore for Visual Studio going to completely replace that? Like, do I still need to have TDS? Like, is there something missing? Is there like a gap in functionality or anything like that? Can I drop TDS, or like, how do I work with these two?
So this tool is built primarily around the new developer experience and the new serialization tools in there. So as far as replacing, maybe eventually for a greenfield project, this is the stuff that you may want to use over doing traditional development for Sitecore if you're doing a project using the new developer experience. As far as gaps in functionality, it doesn't have things like validators yet. It doesn't have code generation. We're evaluating that. We're looking at some of the reporting capabilities, some of the things, the more advanced features of TDS will eventually migrate into it. A lot of what we're doing is waiting to see which things the community is looking for.
Right. Now, speaking of things the community is looking for, the first question that we have up here from our guests was about, Sitecore and Hedgehog are merged together now, right? We're one Sitecore now. What about Razzle? Is it going to be able to use all this new tech that we put out in 10?
Well, Razzle still works with everything, but it's not using the same interfaces as this to do its operations. This uses the GraphQL endpoints behind the scenes, and Razzle is still using the existing service that we built for Razzle.
Okay. All right.
Great
So it's a different type of interface that it's using. Okay. So next up, we have a question here about deleting items. So how does it determine which items should be deleted?
Okay. So the scope rules that you saw me set earlier, there's something for create only, create and update, and create, update, and delete. So essentially what you would do is it's got a feature similar to what is built into both TDS and Unicorn, where you specify like what to do with a specific folder, and you control, say with TDS, you would say, do it with your deployment properties, and Unicorn, you do it with predicates. But it's a similar kind of thing where you would configure specific folders to remove, to keep them in sync with what's on the file system or not. So if it sees something's missing in the file system, it would remove it from Sitecore, much the same way TDS would do when you have all children synchronization. But what happens is in this, you can specify, much more granular things with rules for very specific folders underneath things and things like that. So you could really carefully kind of craft a configuration that allows you to do exactly what you want.
Okay, well, that's good. I think one of the common questions that I think a lot of people are on their minds is about licensing. Obviously, how do we get their hands on this? So, do they need a license to use this tool?
For Sitecore for Visual Studio, yes. For the developer experience tools, no. Other than the Sitecore
so I think when you
license,
say developer experience tools, you mean something like the Sitecore CLI.
The CLI and all of that tooling.
Yeah, so that stuff you get out of the box, and then if you want to use the Visual Studio plugin itself, which is similar to the TDS experience, that's you get that with your TDS license, right?
Yes.
Okay, that's good. Now, the next thing up is we talked about serialization being very much like the merge of the best of TDS and Unicorn. So the obvious follow-up question is, for what we got from the audience, is this a better option than Unicorn, or do you use them together?
I'm not sure how well they would work together. The developer experience CLI, APIs, and the kind of the whole way of doing things was much of it was already in motion when Hedgehog joined Sitecore, and was all built by Cam. So this covered some things probably that he wanted to do. He'd have to speak to that in Unicorn. Is it better? I'm not sure. I think it's a little simpler to configure, but again, depends on what you're familiar with.
Yeah. But obviously it's not like feature parity, right? There might be something in Unicorn that it doesn't do, right? So you have to go check out which tool is the right one for your particular project need, right?
Yes. When I first started looking at this, I saw a lot of similarities between both tools with a kind of, they mixed them together, and Cam, I think, did a great job with that.
Oh, that's great. Thanks. And another good one is like, what can I use this with? Does it work on any version of Sitecore, or is it specific to Sitecore 10? Like, what versions can I go and use this new tooling with?
This is specific to Sitecore 10. You have to be using all the latest stuff, because that's, again, whatever the developer CLI and that tooling is compatible with is what this is compatible with.
Right. Now, we talked a little bit about gaps between different tools. And one of the questions that came in here is whether or not security field pushing, where we only push the security data, like we could do with TDS. So is that something you can do?
Not really. This is what's called desired state system. So the idea is that for everything that you've built configuration around, it makes it look exactly like that, regardless of what it is. So you're not really going to be able to do that.
Okay, so if you want that, that would be a scenario where you would try to introduce TES and to use that particular use case.
Potentially, yes. Or write a script to do it somehow.
And another one of the questions that came in was regarding like development work that you need to do versus content you need to put to production. Is there a way that you can separate that stuff apart so that you can, manage your different environments?
Yeah. So I'm sorry I had to move very quickly in that video. I did try to cover that. We were given a very short window for doing things. But yes, so what you would do is you could potentially create either modules that are developer specific content and then choose not to include those modules in your packages that you deploy, or you could use rules to exclude certain parts of the content tree that you may want to chuck your own stuff into for testing and whatnot. So there's lots of things there.
Right. So the next question that we've got up here is going to be another kind of like Delta with TDS question. Is lightning deploy still possible? And maybe explain lightning deploy first as to what that means. And then can we do that with the new tool?
Yeah, so very quickly, lightning deploy, what it does is it just passes a checksum of the item up and then compares it on the server and only updates things that are different. This essentially does that out of the box by default. It's really fast. So essentially, you can't actually turn lightning deploy off.
Okay.
So it's always on.
So it's always fast.
It's always fast.
There's no slow mode.
Right.
Is what you're saying.
We hope.
Yeah. So now I know that we're getting up against time here. So we're only going to have a few more questions here. But I think one of the things that I really liked about this was the content automation perspective of it, right? There was a real, like you could tell by the way it was put together that it was targeting that use case of like, you need to go and support this. And one of the questions here, which is really good about this, is about what do you have to do to set it up for Azure DevOps so that you can deploy this new type of package through? Like, how does that work?
So essentially there's a package that has all of the new developer experience tooling for the server that you would install as part of Sitecore.
Mm-hmm.
You would also install that, just like you would install, JSS and those other things that, are needed for this. It's just install a package. And then as far as deployment goes, you would need to include the .NET tool in your on your build server. And then you would just do, if you remember at the end of the video, I just did a Sitecore Seer package push and done.
Yeah, and there's some kind of authentication piece we have to set up too, right?
Yeah,
like a token?
security things. You gotta put into your into the identity server. You have to put some shared secrets and whatnot.
Yeah.
If you look at the docs in the doc Sitecore site, they tell you exactly how to set that up.
And plug for something my team put together. We have an MVP site up on GitHub where we've got our Azure DevOps stuff configured as well. So we've got some examples of how to do the auth there as well. Now, sticking with the deployment piece, we have another question is like, what does the actual deployment mechanism look like? Is it just a regular Sitecore package? How is it handling the deletions when you go to a target environment? Like, what does that piece look like underneath? I think that might be our last question for today.
Yeah. So again, this kind of goes back to the desired state thing. The deployment mechanism, you would build the package, which again, like I showed at the end of the video, you would package up your solution, and then when you push that package, the package is just a zip of all of your YAML files and a whole bunch of config and stuff like that. You can crack it open with a zip program and see what's in it. But essentially, that pushes those things up there. And as far as deletions go, it's handled by that configuration where you would say for this, create update for the item deployment setting is create update delete, or just create. So if you chose create update delete, anything in that particular tree that's not in the package would be deleted. Other things, of course, created and updated. For the other ones, it would just leave them alone.
Awesome. Thank you, Charlie. we are running out of time here. There's a bunch more questions. So is there a way that we can get these questions answered by you? Is there a way that they can connect with you?
That's a good question. Yeah, the best way, I guess we could work on social media thing after this, Jason.
Have them reach out to you on Twitter?
Yeah. I'm not much for social media. I'm sorry.
Well, then you can reach out to me on Twitter, and
Yes.
I will go bug him in the office.
We'll sort it out. Yeah, we
All
will
right.
get those. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.